Greetings, backers. My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes. Once again, a huge thank you to everyone who has already jumped on Sebastian Crowe's Guide to Drakkenheim and supported the Kickstarter project.
We have blown through so many stretch goals. We've gotten to unlock new subclasses, additional content, and even some extra accessories for our Kickstarter campaign. And we just owe you all the biggest thank you to helping us make this such a success. And we're so excited to talk about some of these amazing subclasses that we're putting in this book.
In this video, we're going to discuss the contaminated character options that we have created for characters in 5th edition that they can use in the world of Drakkenheim. If you're familiar with our previous project, Dungeons of Drakkenheim, we introduced a new mechanic for 5th edition called Eldritch Contamination. At the time, we actually made a full video explaining that mechanic, so if you want to check that out, it's right up over here. Eldritch Contamination is otherworldly radiation that causes debilitating effects and horrific mutations on characters that accumulate it over time. Eventually, if you gain 6 levels of Eldritch Contamination, your character transforms into a horrific monster and you lose control of that character.
Now, if you didn't back the first Kickstarter, don't worry. The rules for contamination and all the systems that you'll need for your games are also in Sebastian Crowe's Guide to Drakkenheim. So if you want to implement contamination into your games, you will have the tools to do that here. With the contamination system, which is usually something that monsters are going to be wielding against the players, it is also something that the players can harness to use contaminated magic. These spells present much more powerful options, but they come at the cost of gaining levels of contamination when you use them. The subclasses that we're going to talk about today can augment or change the way that contamination works in your games.
Perhaps no subclass embodies this more than the Malfeasant Wizard, the master of contaminated magic and spellcasting. As Kelly mentioned earlier, normally when characters cast contaminated spells, they gain a level of contamination. But the Malfeasant Wizard has an increased threshold. While normally most characters can only accumulate 6 levels of contamination before transforming into a monster, the Malfeasant Wizard can accumulate 12 contamination levels and doesn't suffer the negative effects of contamination symptoms while they're concentrating on a spell.
With contamination coursing through their veins, they're able to corrupt non-contaminated spells with their contaminated casting mechanic. This is going to allow them to upcast regular spells without using a higher level spell slot in exchange for levels of contamination.
It should come as no surprise that in the world of Drakkenheim, these Malfeasant Wizards are banished from the Amethyst Academy and hunted by the Silver Order. So if you really want to feel the power of the dark, corrupted wizard, the Malfeasant Wizard is definitely your ticket.
Next up, we have the Circle of Contamination Druid. This druid takes on a twisted mockery of nature, using the dark and blighted magic found in natural environments to empower and change their spells.
The Circle of Contamination Druid very much embodies the dark side of nature, having been corrupted by contamination and coming to take nature's revenge. As such, they wield blighted magic. They are able to use contamination to modify druid spells, in a way similar to the Sorcerer's metamagic feature, enabling them to contaminate their existing spells to do additional damage or add additional effects to druid spellcasting.
On top of that, these druids gain the Aberrant Shape ability, which is going to allow them to use Wild Shape to change into aberrations, opening up a lot of really terrifying and mutated, scary options for this druid.
Of course, since the city of Drakkenheim was destroyed by a shower of Delirium meteors, many more have been born and tainted with that inborn magical power, thus becoming Delirium soul sorcerers. Because they are imbued with the chaotic energies of Delirium, their contaminated sorcery feature means that whenever they use their sorcery points, they cause arcane anomalies with all sorts of wild and chaotic magical effects.
Their incomprehensible arcana ability is going to allow them to channel contamination to cast spells that they don't currently know.
Of course, when they do this, it's also going to cause some chaotic and contaminated magical effects.
Our next subclass represents the first soldiers and warriors who ventured into Drakkenheim. Many died in those first forays into the ruined city, but those who came back were tainted and changed by what they found within. This is the Haze Rager Barbarian. They wrestle with the madness of a supernatural rage brought on by spending so much time in the haze and contaminated environments of Drakkenheim.
They get a feature called Contaminated Fury, which empowers their rage letting them expel contaminated energy to do extra necrotic damage while they're raging.
Not only that, but as long as they are raging, they do not suffer the negative effects of contamination. Keep in mind, though, that when you finish your combat encounter, you better be ready to get a little sick.
Uniquely, though, the Haze Rager Barbarian can actually consume the contamination of their allies. So if your friends get contaminated, you can help them out by drawing the contamination into yourself.
Eventually, these barbarians become one with the haze itself, allowing them to exhale a breath weapon of contamination and turn into mist themselves.
Finally, we have the Flesh Patron for the Warlocks. This dark pact allows a symbiotic entity to inhabit the body of the Warlock, representing a tendril of an ancient being beyond comprehension. This lets the Warlock mutate their body and flesh into strange and unfathomable forms.
As you gain levels, you'll be able to unlock new different mutations that you can apply to your body and adapt and change them based on the circumstances you find themselves in. Not only that, but you'll be able to use these mutations and body augmenting forms to simply change your appearance, to appear as a different race or a different person in any circumstance you need to.
The mutations that you can embody will allow you to grow tentacles or other natural weapons, even sprout wings or aquatic adaptations.
So these are our new contaminated subclasses for 5th edition being introduced in this book. Specifically with these subclasses that we've introduced, we think it's important to keep in mind that in order for these to really work at the table, you should be using the contamination mechanics, either in your Drakkenheim game, where you will be using the contamination mechanics, but we've also included the contamination mechanics in Sebastian Crowe's Guide to Drakkenheim for you to use freely in any campaign setting you choose. If you're going to be bringing these characters to play, though, we do recommend having monsters that are using contamination and areas that are affected by the contamination.
One of the really cool things about the contamination mechanic is the gamble that players get to take while using it. Are you going to use your contaminated magic to gain much more powerful abilities, but risk that you might become contaminated and transform into a monster yourself? This adds a really interesting dynamic to any campaign setting, whether or not you're running it in Drakkenheim or not. So if you are going to allow these contaminated character options in your own campaigns outside of the world of Drakkenheim, we do recommend that you regularly have your characters face contaminated monsters and contaminated regions so they can properly feel the consequences of their dark choices.
So stay tuned as we look at more of the subclasses we've created for 5th edition in future videos, and we hope that you are excited to experience these contaminated characters in your games.
To all of you out there who have backed our project already, a massive thank you from both Kelly, myself, and the team at Ghostfire Gaming. We so appreciate the support, and we can't wait to show you what more we still have in store.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time in Drakkenheim.